Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human and avid fruit eater, Arif Hassan. Arif, when is the last time that you had a piece of fruit?
Like a physical piece of fruit, I don't remember, but fruit content pretty recently.
So you had said on Twitter that you were that you're in your like mid-season form when your girlfriend asks you about your fruit intake. So I wanted to get this out there just right away because people were clamoring to know.
So like I told Luke Braun and Zachary Pierce, this is a definitional question. If we count tomatoes and tomato products as fruit, then extremely recently, like basically yesterday. That, for some reason, despite it being botanically correct, doesn't sit with people. Can't figure out why. But I mean, like, you know, I have like the smoothie juice. It's not even like the juice that's like 80% sugar or whatever, but like, you know, like naked juice or Adwala, like actual like juice that has like fruit content in it.
Yeah, it's you're not sitting here just like mainlining Fruitopias or something like.
No, I'm clearly not like a mad about. I mean, I enjoy fruit a lot, but like I'm not like mainlining it. Yeah, but you know, I have it. I have fruit. I'm a human.
Well, let's not go that far. You just have access to fruit, and that was the question. That was what was on people's minds for some reason. So that I was going to make that Patreon only and decided against it. So my generosity is shining through here.
Side note: many of the critical nutrients that you find in fruit, you'll find in a 5-hour energy. So you know.
Is that it? What, are you trying to argue that the nutritional contents of a 5-hour... No, you know what? I've had enough
the only reason fruit matters is because of its nutritional content. So if I can find another way...
like, if I could just find another vehicle in order to get
in which
this.
case, I've had fruit within the last several hours.
There you go.
Functionally.
And probably at some point during the show, too. Be fantastic. All right, well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code, which is going to be apparently fruit-free. We have several things to talk about this episode, including the breaking news today out of camp about Anthony Barr. We will also be reviewing the Colts game to a certain extent, after which we will review all aspects of the Vikings 2020 roster. We're looking at it all because there are a lot of question marks going into week 3. And then we, of course, have our mailbag, but just want to thank you guys so much for listening, for enjoying the show, for spreading the word about Norse Code on social media, in person, smoke signals, physical mail, however it is that you tell people about Norse Code. Just want to thank you guys so much for doing so. If you would like to support Norse Code, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and you can become a subscriber to our feeds. We have our bonus content that comes out once a week, along with the regular episodes that come out twice a week during the regular season. So you can have access to a lovely conversation that Arif and I had on Thursday night and a little bit into tonight about Hall of Fame kickers and why I think Arif just uses PFF in an argument just to be a dick. Also, you will have
technically Football Outsiders.
Yeah, well,
the rest of that sentence is correct.
Yes, all of that. In addition to that, you have access to the entire back catalog of the Patreon only episodes that we put out. So all the bonus content will be yours at patreon.com/NorseCode. Or if you would like to go to paypal.me/NorseCode, you can make a one-time donation as well for $41.98. That does get you access to it all. But if you just want to toss $3.50 our way, we are very appreciative of any attempts made to keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. We do have 2 Patreon subscribers to mention real quick. Just want to give a quick shout out to Colton and Thomas Hurley. Want to thank you guys so much for supporting us. And at a time when the Vikings need support, really. We need support too, but the Vikings are in very interesting shape. Interesting. No, unwatchable. I think unwatchable shape. And we will be doing the watching for you out of obligation. So let's start off with the breaking news out of Minneapolis, or out of Egan rather, that Anthony Barr appears to be out for the year.
Yeah, this is something that Mike Zimmer shared in his availability with the media, which is pretty notable because he'll share something like this, right? Because there's no advantage to be gained really by putting somebody on IR and then just not telling you whether or not they're going to, be available 3 weeks from now, because no one's prepping like that, right? Because you'll know who you're going to go up against, whether or not they're available that week. You can't just surprise by getting somebody off of IR. So it's pretty notable that he just kind of told us that Anthony Barr is just out for the year with a torn pec. Which is like pretty big. I actually thought Barr was playing pretty well. I know his PFF grade was like 40 something, but yeah, we discussed that the last review. And yeah, it really impacts the way the Vikings have constructed this defense from the very beginning, because a lot of it has to do with the ability of the linebackers to threaten the pass rush on third down, and then get out and get at the flats really quickly, or hit their landmarks in zone. So somebody like Anthony Barr is like pretty difficult to replicate. The Vikings were on the verge of attempting to have to do that when he was going to leave for the Jets, but they were able to kind of retain a lot of the defensive principles of the defense by retaining Anthony Barr. I still think they overpaid him to do that, but it's clear that I think he's more important to the Vikings than a linebacker typically is. And linebackers are probably the least valuable, generally speaking, players on a defense. But Anthony Barr is kind of a little bit different because of the way he kind of enables what the Vikings do on third down in ways that, like, obviously the cornerbacks matter and obviously the defensive linemen matter, but the uniqueness of a cornerback or a defensive lineman wouldn't really impact the way that scheme is designed, whereas the uniqueness of Anthony Barr does. So pretty big loss on the field. And then also Anthony Barr does a lot of the captaincy stuff, a lot of the on the field call stuff. He adjusts the defense and stuff like that. Everybody just kind of assumes it's Kendricks, it's Anthony Barr. I assume Kendricks will take over. So that's a big problem too, because the Vikings have been having issues with communication. This kind of magnifies those issues. And then obviously you kind of feel just for Anthony Barr himself, this has got to be a pretty big blow for him personally. So that sucks as well. I think the net impact, that we'll see a lot more snaps from Eric Wilson. That's going to create some pretty significant problems in the run game, where the Vikings are already pretty weak, as we've seen through 2 games, and could have anticipated based off of the construction of the roster that they'd be weak. It sucks. I mean, it seemed like it happened on a routine play. When I was rewatching the game, I saw like a somewhat mild hit, and I was like, was that the play that Anthony Barr got injured? And the very next play, they were in nickel and Eric Wilson was in, so that must have been it. But it wasn't, a big hit. But sometimes these things happen. Sucks for Anthony Barr. Hopefully, he and Michael Pierce return in force next year.
So I feel bad about making the claim about the whole injury thing last episode and being like, I expected more injuries this week. I did. I was expecting week 1 to be filled with injuries and people.
All your fault. Oh my gosh.
Well, no, but I feel bad.
The whole thing.
Yes, the whole thing. It's all my fault. Fine. All the 7 or so torn ACLs, including Saquon.
Yeah, Bunks will be sending you a check or an invoice.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, it's not saying I was off by a week, but there was an incredible number of season-ending injuries this over the last week that has everyone crying foul. But listen, these things happen in the preseason. This is still the preseason, right?
I've got some bad news for you, buddy.
All right, let's go into the week 2 review of the Colts game. And boy, this just reeked of some of the worst of Christian Ponder. There was a lot of... It felt like a throwback game in a lot of sense that, like, the 3-13 team. This looked ugly from the beginning, It looked ugly in the middle. It looked ugly at the end. And at no point did you feel comfortable at all, whether you were watching the game or if you were Kirk Cousins.
Right. So I would say that the game at least felt in hand until about the second or third play of the second quarter, because the Vikings score on the opening drive. They intercept Phillip Rivers. There's only 2 drives in the first quarter, so that's it. And then at the top of the second quarter, they nearly complete a pass to Kyle Rudolph. It was actually a really good ball. It was accurate, and Kenny Moore, I think it was Kenny Moore, was lucky to get his hands there just in time. Kind of one of those things where I think a different ref would have called pass interference. But I think the announcers are maybe right to point out that the Harrison Smith pass deflection that led to the pick would be pass interference by the same standard. So it's just kind of a lucky play. Really good throw, really good pass defense. Would have been nice for Kyle Rudolph to kind of do a little bit more to secure it. But it's difficult, kind of going in that direction and turning around and then also boxing out a defensive back. So that happens. I think I want to say on 2nd and 9 or something like that. And so it's 3rd and 9. And I think the game turns around, for me, the game turns around when they run the ball. Like it's 3rd and 9, you're deep in your own territory, and they choose to give it to Alexander Madison to run it up the middle. And he bounces it outside because the blocking isn't there. But like, who cares if the blocking's there? That's just a terrible, terrible idea. And so unsurprisingly, the backup guard that's backing up the awful guard that you already had isn't very good and can't secure Darius Leonard, who then stops it for 4 yards, and then you have to punt. And I think karmically, so Britton Colquitt is a good punter, right? And he's just been really good and really consistent for the Vikings, and he's done a pretty good job kind of pinning punts inside the 20 when they're in range, and then otherwise booming it for a little bit over 40 yards on average. So he's a good punter, and he has good hang time, and he kind of has just solid mechanics all around. He's a veteran. And I think the universe just decided that the Vikings committed a karmic wrong by running on 3rd and 9. And unfortunately, Britton Colquitt had to execute kind of the universal justice by shanking the punt. You can't always choose who executes, the divine plan, but that's what happens. And the Colts are in scoring position. And it turns out, strangely, that they score once they're in scoring position.
I would have loved to hear that explanation in a presser. I want Mike Zimmer to sit there and be like, listen, you can't always be prepared for what's going to happen to you karmically. Okay. This is something that just, it's karma. It just kind of happens, and you can't sit there and dwell about it. I'm not going to sit here.
Go to war with the executors of the divine will that you might want to have.
Nice shoehorning of that one. Yes. But yeah, there was a lot of quit in some of the play calling that was called. There was more, at least 3 instances of 3rd and where they just ended up running. You're like, okay, fine, you're trying to do it for trying to get a little bit of room for the punt, but geez, you can't just keep doing this. Eventually, if you keep running on 3rd and 9. You're going to run out of you're going to run out of time on offense. You're done.
Right. So the thing about, whether or not it's better to run or pass for time of possession is always kind of an interesting argument, because if we assume that time of possession is important, and I honestly think that we focus too much on time and not enough on the disparity between plays, because, there's some teams that score pretty fast, but they have a lot of plays, so it doesn't really matter. But if we're worried about time of possession, if we assume that time of possession is this thing that we have to preserve, right? Then there is a difference from play to play between running and passing. But the thing that matters the most is getting first downs. That's how you secure time of possession, by getting first downs. And you can't do that if you're running on 3rd and 9. The Vikings are complaining about, and I'm not saying complaining as if it's not their fault. They're acknowledging it's their fault. But the Vikings are lamenting the fact that they're behind in time of possession in these games. And it's you're running the ball on 3rd and 9. You have to convert a first down so you don't give the ball away. The time of possession requires possession, dude. It's not that difficult. And so, plays like that, and then they punt and the punt gets returned however much it gets returned. And you're just like, well, yeah, I can't say that, you deserved any better than that. And so the fact that the Vikings red zone defense kind of held up, interestingly, the Vikings red zone defense this year is 50%. That's tied for like 12th best in the league. It's not that far from their 40% from last year.
Question, do the Vikings just have a larger sample size than the rest of the league at that point then?
Yes. So they have let people into the red zone more often than I think all but one team last time I checked. But, that's not updated for Monday night and stuff like that. So I don't know yet. But yeah, they had like 12 red zone attempts, and they've only let 50% of them become touchdowns. So just really remarkable stuff. But yeah, last year it was like 41%, which was second best in the league. The year before that, they were top 5. They're the only team on offense or defense that has been consistent about red zone conversion rate. Like, it is just typically it's one of the things that you point to where you'll say this is a reason a team will regress because their red zone conversion rate was either too high or too low on offense or defense. And so points allowed isn't a very good metric here. They still let people get into the red zone, or they still couldn't get into the red zone very often. But here, the Vikings red zone defense was good. It just, kept on getting tested. Because if you're 40%, you're the second best red zone defense in the league or something like that, doing a remarkable job from a rate perspective. Then you just keep letting people into the red zone. And it's like, well, yeah, 40% of a big number is a pretty big number. Like, that's how math works, right? And so you're letting all of these scores come, and then they have to then find a way to play catch up. And so they exit the half, I think, was it 15-3 or something like that? So they're only like down 2 scores, right? And if you look at it historically, road teams come back from that about 15% of the time or 10% of the time, depending on who you look at. But road teams down 2 scores entering the half without possession will make a comeback about 1 every 10 times. And no one really thought the Vikings were one of those teams, right? Like, sometimes those road teams are the Chiefs, and you're just like, well, yeah, of course they came back. Or the Texans, where you're like, okay, yeah, they've got the tools to come back. They've got an explosive offense. It explains why they got down in the first place and why you're not worried about them getting down because they can get back, right? And the Vikings are just like not in that universe of teams where you're just like, yeah, I can see it. And so that felt insurmountable. But at the same time, it is just like 2 scores. And that's really when Cousins really started screwing up, because I thought Cousins, and here's the thing. So he, by the end of the third quarter, has a passer rating of 0.0 and ends the game with a passer rating of 15.9 and has a negative adjusted net yards per attempt, which for people who are not familiar or are new listeners of the show is probably the best quickly calculated passing efficiency metric. It's more predictable and explanatory than like passer rating, for example. And it's just you take yards. Touchdowns are worth 20 yards. Interceptions are worth negative 45 yards. And you count sack yards against the efficiency of the quarterback. So yards minus sack yards plus 20 times touchdowns minus 45 times interceptions divided by attempts plus sacks, right? So that's basically how much value you're generating per dropback. And Cousins was kind of unique this week in that he had negative adjusted net yards per attempt. And some of that is kind of unfair because there's not really a ton of negative value to an interception you throw on a Hail Mary at the end of the half, because the reason interceptions are worth negative yardage values is because you're setting up the other team to score. And in this case, you're not doing that because it's at the end of the half. But at the same time, he also had 2 picks that were dropped, right? One at the very beginning on that first drive, which they got bailed out on anyway because of an illegal contact penalty or something like that, or roughing the passer penalty. That was it. And so even those first drives where the Vikings have actually done all right, they scored 10 points or 5 points per drive for the first 2 opening drives they've had. They got bailed out on this one, right? Well, he nearly threw a pick to Kenny Moore on that first drive on a throw to Olabisi Johnson, I think. And then later in the game, he had a pick 6 dropped, and then the very next play was a pick. And so it's just like, okay, well, yeah, the numbers are not perfectly representative of how well he played, but at the same time, they're not like lying to you about what happened in the game in any meaningful respect. I think ultimately you take the PFF grade for Cousins was not good, right? It was like 50 something, I think. And I think that's like, that is closer to how poorly he played than like rock bottom worst quarterback play of the week or worst quarterback play we've seen over the past 2 weeks. Like that's not how Cousins played. He played really poorly. But I think Dwayne Haskins played, worse this week. I think, and I say this without like a hint of irony or an introduction of my bit, but like Carson Wentz did play worse this week. And he played worse last week. Jeff Driscoll, not like, that beating Jeff Driscoll is like this remarkable bar to clear, but he played worse this week, right? But Cousins was bad. And so you can't get around that. He was just inaccurate. And I was having a Twitter conversation with Derek Clausen, who specializes in evaluating quarterbacks. And he was like, yeah, I don't really get it because Cousins was like just inaccurate. Like that was it. Like he was just inaccurate. There wasn't like he's missing this throw or he doesn't get this read. I was just able to review the all 22 right before we recorded. In some of these plays, I don't know that I'm blaming Cousins for. So that pick that he throws to BC Johnson that actually ends up becoming a pick. That I think he was right to throw it behind BC Johnson. And I know that the announcers were like, you got to throw it so that the receiver has a chance to catch it. And I know some other people on the Vikings beat. And I don't want to like disrespect them or anything like that. But I know some other people on the Vikings beat were like, no, you can't really throw it there. But I watched the game live, and I thought he threw it behind him intentionally in order to protect him. And then I watch it on the all 22, and that kind of confirms it, right? Because there was a defender coming in for him from that side, and that's a very common thing to do on those routes, to throw it behind them to protect the ball. And BC Johnson just doesn't hold on, and frankly that's just his job at that point, is to hold on to the ball. And it's a difficult catch, and that sucks that you have to make this difficult catch, otherwise they blame you, but that's what happened. And so it's a pick, right? And so he sometimes is making the right reads and the right throws with, adequate accuracy, and it's not paying off. He had a couple of drops in this game that are not his fault. There were a couple of really great pass deflections that I wouldn't blame him for. The throw to Adam Thielen that Xavier Rhodes actually got a hand on, really fantastic play from Xavier Rhodes. And not a bad throw from Kirk Cousins. There were times where Kirk Cousins just made an absolutely terrible decision. The safety, he needs to get rid of the ball. I think I retweeted this video where somebody was talking about, might have been Matt Waldman, it might have been somebody else, where somebody was talking about how Cousins had hitched twice in the pocket in the end zone on that safety and needed to get rid of the ball. And the person making the video was implying that, the person to the left of Cousins was open. And they were like, I think this person is open. I don't know. Maybe this person is open or not. I watched it on the all 22, and yeah, absolutely, that person was right. That person was absolutely open to the left of Cousins, even for a dump off, right? And I think it was second down, so you didn't have to worry about conversion all that much. And then actually, you watch it on the all 22, and there's one other person that was definitely open, and another person that was about to break open, and then Cousins has to throw it with anticipation. And instead, he holds onto the ball and he gets sacked. That's terrifyingly bad. Like the first sack this year that was a safety. That's not really his fault. You want him to see it coming and get rid of the ball, but you can't really blame him, I think, for when your running back misses the protection on what shouldn't even be a blitzing cornerback, right? But this one, I think, well, I wouldn't say it was necessarily his fault. I think DeForest Buckner just kind of driving through. I think it was Dakota Dozier. Yeah, it was Dakota Dozier for the sack. Like that's obviously on Dozier, but Cousins has an opportunity to prevent that from becoming a sack, and he doesn't take advantage of it. And so, yeah, he was abysmal there. I think as the game went on, he got worse, which is why it kind of sucked for, midway through the game, I'm tweeting, actually, I don't think Cousins has been actually all that bad. And he throws like this egregious pick that gets dropped, and then later, the very next play, it is a pick, and I'm just like, well, okay, I shouldn't have tweeted that at all. But he actually wasn't that bad for the first half, and then he just got like worse and worse and worse, and just more and more inaccurate. And then I'm looking at the all 22, and he's missing like some pretty good opportunities. And the Colts were playing a lot of single high midway through the game. I know that when we talked to our guests, they said that the Colts would play a lot of two high, and I think that was true early in the game. But looking at what we saw kind of in the middle and then later in the game, there's a lot of one-on-one opportunities. And Cousins needed to take them because the only way you're going to win the game is by taking, chances that make sense. The throw in double coverage to Thielen, that was not a chance that made sense. There was actually a throw underneath. Thielen was taking that safety with him, whether or not Cousins was going to throw the ball. And so Thielen just is pulling both of those players. It's not, those situations where it looks like double coverage, but it's only because somebody saw the throw and then reacted. Thielen was actually just pulling both defenders. And so there's this huge gap where I think it was Kyle Rudolph was underneath, and he could have hit him for an easy 20 yards. So there were plays like that. Cousins was bad. He wasn't as bad as his stat line, but it's not as if his stat line kind of lied about what happened. He suffered from a couple of drops. That happens. But he's responsible for that safety. He had the worst expected points of any quarterback this week. I think a lot of that's because of the safety. Although like a couple of picks, that's not great. And expected points doesn't take into account time remaining. So they'll penalize him more for the Hail Mary pick than they should. But you waffle a little bit here and there and you say, well, okay, yeah, he wasn't the worst quarterback last week. And that's not the bar we should be evaluating this $33 million dude by. So that's frustrating. How were the receivers in this game? I got a couple of questions about that. They weren't great. They weren't doing a lot to create separation, but there were opportunities there that they created that Cousins wasn't taking advantage of. How was the defense? I think from a coverage perspective, the defense was actually mostly fine. It's just Mo Alley Cox that was a problem. And the fact that Eric Kendricks wasn't playing in coverage very well was a huge problem. Obviously, Jeff Gladney got roasted several times, gave up 2 big plays, one to Mo Alley Cox and another one to Michael Pittman or something. T.Y. Hilton for 28 yards, 17 of them after the catch. That was a problem. But Mike Hughes, I thought, played really well. He gave up 8 yards or something like that. Holton Hill, I thought, played all right. He gave up one big play, and then he gave up a 15-yard in or something to Pittman, but otherwise played all right. In coverage, that cornerback group played a little bit better. Anthony Harris played a lot better. Harrison Smith played a lot better than they did last week. But you just don't get the sense that there's a complete team here or even a complete unit. Ngakoue played really well. There were only 25 dropbacks, but he got pressures on 4 of them. That's a 16% pressure rate. That's exactly his pressure rate against the Colts over the past 3 years. And that's a fairly elite pressure rate. That's good to get, especially against that talented of an offensive line. But, without an additional member of that defensive line, they just weren't going to get anything done. And they just got destroyed in the run game, especially up the middle. The Vikings were all right on the outside in the run game, getting sweeps, getting to those outside runs, getting to outside zone. Particularly, Kendricks was doing an all right job with that. But then these inside runs, Jaleel Johnson's getting moved off the ball. Armon Watts is getting moved around a little bit. Shamar Stephen is kind of losing a bunch of battles to Quentin Nelson. Eric Kendricks is getting pushed off the ball by Denzel Good. And Kendricks seemed to be kind of just missing his gap assignments, which, I'm just some writer watching a couple of days after the game, and I've got this opportunity to pause, slow down, rewind, and I don't have the playbook in front of me. So I can't just say for a fact, hey, Kendricks, you missed your gap. But the Colts motion somebody outside. Every linebacker seems to adjust which gap they're attacking, except Kendricks. Now Kendricks is now attacking a gap that's being taken by a nose tackle. And it's you can't both attack the A gap, and Jonathan Taylor goes up the B gap, gets 13 yards on a run. So yeah, the running game was pretty brutal. Kendricks is just needs to be a better player than he's been over the past 2 weeks. He was fine in coverage in week 1, but he was a liability against the run in both of these games, especially in this game. And it was just kind of a complete loss for the Vikings. I mean, they had one moment on special teams that was good, one moment on special teams that was bad. That bad one kind of outweighs the good one by a pretty significant margin. The offense couldn't get things done. They didn't have the ball that much, mostly because they couldn't find ways to convert on third down. And the defense just kept on finding ways to give up big plays to, frankly, a second-year undrafted backup tight end. I know Mo Alley Cox is pretty exciting to a lot of people that just discovered him. Jake Arthur, our guest, was pumping him up on his podcast before the game, and not to downplay their evaluations, because very clearly they were correct that Alley Cox was somebody that was kind of worth watching. But like the Vikings need to handle tight ends like that. That's not George Kittle. That's not Darren Waller. That's a dude who played basketball and is 270 pounds. Get it together. So yeah, it was just a brutal game. I don't know what else.
I think brutal is one of the better ways to describe it. Here's my problem with a bit of Vikings Twitter, because we got like 2 questions on this very topic, and they were comparisons of Cousins' performance on Sunday to the apocalypse of Vikings games, which was the Giants Monday night game where a guy who'd been on the squad for all of 48 hours was then told he was starting, which was Josh Freeman. Let me be perfectly clear, as somebody who covered that game for an episode of Norse Code, which I found a copy of that the other day. I was actually looking for that episode because somebody had asked to hear it. So PFF, I actually just looked it up. PFF rated Josh Freeman's performance that night at negative 11.3 as the overall grade. He threw what? I actually have it here. 15 of Freeman's 33 incompletions were overthrown, according to PFF. Let me be perfectly clear when I say this was not a Josh Freeman-esque performance. It still sucked. Don't get me wrong. But this was not the end-all, be-all of the worst performances of Vikings quarterbacks. It just wasn't very good.
Yeah, like in the annals of terrible Vikings quarterback play, I don't think this rates. Like, I think Joe Webb versus the Packers, Josh Freeman versus the Giants, McNabb versus the Chargers. Ugh. I think all of those were definitely worse, right? I probably missed 2 that were worse than McNabb versus the Chargers, but the past like 8 years,
there were some Ponder games that were.
I'm trying to remember like a Ponder game, but like they all kind of blend together because they're all like 4-yard checkdowns, and they must be when the worst Ponder games must have occurred when Percy Harvin wasn't available to like boost everything, and they couldn't just hand it off to Adrian Peterson. So like, whatever Ponder games occurred in 2013, those were probably worse.
There was a terrible Ponder game versus, because Ponder had this weird history against Green Bay where sometimes he would just show up. I mean, like, I don't understand.
His very first start, yeah.
He had a good game against Green Bay once, and then the second time, and then the next time he played them, it was like the opposite of what he had done to be successful the first time. So there were a couple of games of Ponders that were rough, but nothing compared to the power, the glory, the forever of the Josh Freeman Giants game. That game was so special that recently I went out and bought, or like last year when I was giving out swag, I went out and bought Josh Freeman Vikings trading cards because somebody actually had them out somewhere. And I was sending those out to people who had subscribed on Patreon as a gift. Like, that's what kind of a terrible person I am. Well, listen, we can.
This is how bad that game was. So if you, what was Eli Manning's last year? 2017.
Eli Manning was done last year.
Okay, so it was 2019.
Yes.
Oh wow, Jesus Christ, this summer's lasted forever.
Yes, it has lasted approximately 7 years.
Yeah, so Eli Manning's worst games over the past 3 years have just been pretty awful, right? I think that Monday night game against Josh Freeman was one of Eli Manning's worst games ever, and it was so bad. So think about how bad Eli Manning has been. Think about what the worst possible performance from that player could be, and then think about the fact that Josh Freeman was absolutely unquestionably worse. He was just a brutally bad game. Brutally bad. So this doesn't rate.
Announcers came back, or was it when it cut to SportsCenter after the game, the announcers apologized for what had just aired on their network.
Man, I kind of wish that it was SVP doing SportsCenter then, because I would have loved that take. Like, oh boy.
Yeah. That was a game that the SportsCenter desk the personalities apologized to the viewers for. I want to find that if it's on YouTube, because that was just, it was so horrendously bad. And it like the worst preseason game you've ever seen was not that uncomfortable to watch. Like, this was just, you felt every bit of awful after watching it. It was truly a work of art. But again, this wasn't a Josh Freeman incident level of terrible. This was just bad. Let's forgo the rest of the review for right now, because we really should look at the 2020 roster right now, because this is an 0-2 team, and this is not going to get any easier. It's not going to get any better, and there is a real possibility that this team goes 0-6 before the bye if they keep up this fantastically terrible pace. And the first place you have to look is the quarterback play and what Kirk Cousins is doing.
So remember when Cousins like absolutely boofed it against the Bears the first time in like week 4, I think, last year? I think it was last year. Yeah.
Yes.
And I said something like, this was Kirk Cousins' worst statistical performance. It's very unlikely he'll ever repeat this again. And I said again, like forever again. So obviously, like, yeah, whoop. But it is still unlikely that he'll play as poorly as he did in this game going forward, despite what we've seen for the past 2 games. He is a better quarterback than what we saw. And we have evidence of that because we have, like, last year. And there's a difference between, Cousins is an insanely disappointing quarterback that, like, absolutely finds ways to get your hopes up enough to disappoint you, which is like why it was inevitable that he was signed with the Vikings. And like a bad quarterback, like he's not Mark Sanchez, right? Like he's just better than this. And so I don't expect him to repeat this level of performance, at least statistically, going forward. I don't think, even if he starts, and he probably will, because like they're not going to go to like, it's not Trevor Siemian, it's Sean Mannion. That's how bad the backup is. I can't even tell them apart. They're not going to go to Sean Mannion at any point. And although if you want to be in for a wild ride, it would be like Jake Browning or Nate Stanley. They're just like, yeah, we're starting Nate Stanley. Yeah, we saw what happened in the Big Ten. We're comfortable with that.
I forget which person from PFF was on the video of that was on Twitter today, of like, the Vikings don't have a plan B at quarterback. You have Kirk Cousins this year. They're not going to go to anyone else. You are going to be stuck watching Kirk Cousins all year. And I felt a bit trapped at that particular moment. Oh, well, now that you mention it that way, oh no.
But yeah, they're like that. While that would be maybe the most interesting kind of moment of the season based off of our prospects for the season, it's not happening. Like, Kirk Cousins is going to start for the rest of the year unless they secure a spot and can't improve their seeding, which is a hilarious prospect down 0-2 after these 2 games to think about. But if they go into week 17 having no opportunities to improve their playoff position, they'll play probably Jake Browning. I don't know, maybe Sean Mannion again. Okay, so but the other like 12 or 13 games of the season, it's going to be Kirk Cousins. And I don't think he's going to play like this again. I don't think he's ever going to play this poorly this season. I'm going to hedge my bet this time. So is the quarterback position just like broken bad? No, but I think we've explored the limits to what you can get out of this setup based off of things like, offensive line, receiving talent, offensive coordinator, philosophy, etc. And when somebody kind of just has the Vikings kind of figured out, it's difficult for Cousins to respond. And so what was the play action rate in week 1 was something like 4%. And very obvious, and I thought that was fine, actually. Like, very obviously the Vikings shied away from play action because the Packers eviscerated them on play action in the previous 2 matchups, just demolished them. They had worse efficiency from play action than from standard dropbacks. So yeah, I'm fine with that. But the problem is you need to have some resolution, some response to not having play action, some way to make Kirk Cousins comfortable when you get that, when you take that away from him, either by scheme from offense or by a defense kind of just crashing in on the quarterback. And if you do that, then, and you've got a plan B, then you'll be fine. This is kind of like the limits of like what the Vikings can accomplish if they don't find ways to like offensively coordinate creatively out of the limitations of Cousins. I think that there were some problems with the way plays were called these last 2 weeks. I think that there aren't enough option routes for receivers, and it's like a young receiver group outside of Thielen. So I get it, but there needs to be some mid route adjustment that obviously both Cousins and the receivers agree on. Some mid route adjustments based off of the coverage that they're seeing, because sometimes the receivers are running routes directly into coverage and just aren't open based off of the route concept versus that coverage. Like it's like rock paper scissors, and the defense is picking the right is shooting the right symbol, right? And it's just like you can't keep doing that without some sort of adaptiveness built into the offense. And it needs to be built into the system, right? Because Cousins isn't a scramble and an improvised quarterback. Can't just hold on to the ball for a little bit longer and be in sync on the scramble drill with everybody else. It's just not who he is. It needs to be systematized. And so they need to have answers, right? If they don't do that, then there needs to be some other answer to when the defense has the right coverage called against your route concepts, and there isn't. So from that perspective, that's a problem. From the perspective of Cousins as talent, it's very clear he's much better with a good offensive line and a good receiving group than without. That's obviously true for every quarterback, but it seems to be more true for Cousins than others. And while the tackle play has improved, Riley Reif has not actually been all that bad. Brown O'Neill has been all right, although he got torched by Zadarius Smith in week 1. He actually had a pretty good game here. And Garrett Bradbury seems to be doing all right. The guard play is predictably just abysmal, right? And so you're getting interior pressure, and Cousins has to respond to that without being a quarterback that generally has the tools to respond to that. So we're seeing what happens when you've got a quarterback that needs everything kind of right, not have everything be right, and in fact have everything be wrong. And so that's, the bottom side to, we've seen the upside to Kirk Cousins. It was like October of last year. And now we're seeing kind of the bottom end of it where this kind of looks a lot like San Francisco Cousins and so forth. So yeah, the quarterback position isn't like screwed, and it's not like the problem, although it's very easy to say it is after, watching what happened in Indianapolis. It's not the problem. The issue is that it's like not the solution. And that's kind of what a lot of winning teams get to be able to do, is they'll say, hey, this defensive line, that's a problem. And it's like, it doesn't matter. We got a quarterback, right? Like your quarterback can just be your solution. And Cousins is just not a solution. And that itself is a problem, right? Cousins isn't a problem, but the fact that he's not a solution is a problem. Hopefully that framing makes sense, because like it sounds kind of stupid saying it out loud, but I think it makes sense.
So let's talk about the running game for a moment, which hasn't been terrible, but we haven't had you would think with the amount of points that the Vikings have been down over these past 2 weeks that there wouldn't be a lot of running, because, you have to pass the ball when you're down double digits, but there still has been a fair amount of running, and Cook hasn't looked terrible, and neither has Madison, but at least you could question the play calling.
I thought about this. So the Vikings have actually been run heavy in neutral situations, which I think you take a look at Cook's total touches, which is 29, 26 runs maybe. And you're like, man, you got to get Cook the ball. And it's just like, well, when the score has been within 2 margins in the first 3 quarters, the Vikings have run the ball like 49% of the time and passed the ball 51% of the time. And that is like a 28th ranked pass rate in the league. So they're actually pretty run heavy. It just doesn't seem like it because they just don't have that many plays. Like it's been like 40 plays that they've run in both of these games. And typically you get 60 to 70 plays. So they haven't been throwing the ball much, and they haven't been running the ball much. It's because they haven't been doing anything with the ball much, because they haven't had the goddamn ball. So the play calling is an issue, I think, from the perspective of play design. I think from run pass balance, I would actually like to see them throw the ball more, and if not, choose better opportunities to run. I like the diversity of what's happening on first down. And actually, I want to say this about the offensive coordinator. I don't like the route concept sometimes. I actually like a lot of the other stuff that's happening. I would like more motion at the snap. I would like a little bit more play action. But I do like that they're much more willing to go in empty on third down, right? I think Cousins is the kind of quarterback that can handle 5-person pass protection and respond to a blitz. Like, his thing is that he's bad under pressure. Fine. That doesn't mean he's bad against the blitz. He's actually fine against the blitz. And so when there's another player blitzing the quarterback, and so now it's 5-on-5 or 6-on-5 in terms of pressure, there's going to be someone vacating their coverage assignment, and Cousins does a pretty good job taking advantage of that. So I'm actually fine going in empty and not having additional protection, in favor of having additional receivers and more options to get open and catch the ball. I like that. I like that there's a lot more 3 receiver sets than we saw last year, and I don't think Irv Smith is doing anything to prove that he deserves to be on the field more than he has been thus far. I'd like him to kind of turn it around, but I like the 3 receiver sets. We've even seen 4 receiver sets. I like them going in bunch on one side and ISO on the other side. I think that's great. I think these 4x1 sets and empty look really good. I think the 3x2 sets and empty look good. I think the 3x1 set with one back looks good. I think all of that's great and surprisingly modern for a pair of former head coaches that are like collectively 170 years old. I like that. I think that offense actually looks pretty interesting. So from a design perspective, there's some things that I actually just really like. It's just not getting executed, and so it all kind of looks bad. I think the temptation is to return to the previous iteration of the offense. But the problem is you can never do that because you just don't have Stephon Diggs. Like you can't. And so to say that the problem is all of the changes that we've made on offense, I think is a little bit short-sighted in terms of the way we evaluate processes, because you can't return to what was. And so things that could be upgrades might look like downgrades. Like if you tried to repeat what the offense was last year, you'd be in an even worse spot than you are now. It just doesn't feel like it because we remember last year. But I think a lot of these things that they're doing on offense actually look pretty good. And I was a little bit concerned by the comments we heard today from Cousins and from the team in general that made it seem like, well, we're going to try and go back to who we are and our roots. They're still a run-heavy team in neutral situations. They haven't been in neutral situations very often, so it feels very much like they're a pass-heavy team, and they're not. They're a run-heavy team. And I don't want them to run the ball more when they're down 2 scores in the fourth quarter. I think that's silly. So I like what they're doing a lot, but I would just like a little bit more flexibility built into the routes, which requires a level of chemistry that Cousins has not really developed with some of these receivers, but it's kind of do or die. You just like figure it out. And if you don't, you're already screwed anyway. So you might as well just do it. And yeah, I think that there's like opportunities here. And I think that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to evaluating what's happening on offense.
Well, let's talk about those receivers, shall we? We have one receiver. We have Adam Thielen. And then we have a few guys that Cousins occasionally can throw to. Like Jefferson got a couple of catches here, but this has been, if Adam Thielen goes out for any reason, I have no reason to believe that the Vikings are going to be able to make even 100 yards of passing a thing.
Yeah, so I looked at Cousins versus when his top 2 receivers go out, his top receiver goes out. And so going all the way back to Washington when he's had Deshaun Jackson and Jordan Reed, they unfortunately got injured a lot, and they only very rarely were both injured at the same time. When both of them were injured, Cousins' yards per attempt cratered, and his adjusted yards per attempt cratered. It was like 4.36 adjusted net yards per attempt, which over the course of a year will be one of the worst season-long passing efficiency numbers we've ever seen, and it would be the worst of any quarterback last year and stuff like that in terms of a season-long performance. Like 4.36, just awful. With one receiver missing, he was around 7.22, and with no receivers missing, he was significantly better. This isn't a surprise. The more good players you have around you, the better you'll be. But the significance of his swings are just absolutely enormous. And so we're already kind of seeing that with Stephon Diggs gone. Now, it didn't really happen last year because Diggs was, I think, used correctly. And so you ended up with a remarkably efficient offense, even though Thielen was gone, with Diggs in the lineup. But now that you don't have somebody else to go to when a player goes down, if Thielen goes down, yeah, I mean, I like the Justin Jefferson pick, and I think there's still a lot of time for it to bear out. But I don't trust him right now to pick up the load. You'd have to go into two tight end a little bit more often, maybe. I don't, I'm not a huge Chad Beebe guy. I think a lot of people know that. Tajay Sharp is like fine, but he's not like a number one or even a number two receiver. That's a difficult load to carry. And so now you're stuck with like Olabisi Johnson and Justin Jefferson, attempting to replicate what Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs can do. And that's just, you're almost cutting your efficiency in half. I wouldn't say that like, you got a pair of 75-yard receivers and you replace them both and suddenly they become, 38-yard receivers or whatever half that is. They would probably be like 60-yard receivers, but the reduction in efficiency just kind of goes on and on and on and kind of everywhere. So, yeah, if Thielen's out, if he gets injured again, like that's it. Like I don't see how the offense can score. And that's even, I think Dalvin Cook is good and I think Alexander Madison is good. I just don't think that the running game is going to consistently and sustainably provide opportunities to score. Yeah.
So the offensive line, it's hard to protect Kirk Cousins when you're lying on the ground on your back. And there's been some of that.
Yeah, notably Drew Samia, who got blown the hell up. Oh my god,
trucked.
Yeah, man, he had like a bad. So it's not even just that play. Like that play was like a pretty good indication of what was happening. But yeah, he had an awful game, and it makes sense that Pat Elflein was starting above him because Pat Elflein's a better guard. So that sentence should probably tell you a lot then, right? Because Pat Elflein is not very good. Dakota Dozier is not very good. And the Vikings like tried to like get ahead of this by saying, no, Dakota Dozier is actually going to be really good. He's much stronger than he's ever been. He's finally got like a bunch of years in the same system, which he's always been in the same system. So it's kind of weird. But, they kind of like told people like, he's really strong this year. His strength is incredible this year. Now you get to pair it with his athleticism. And it's all coming together in a way that we hadn't seen for him before. And it was very much like best shape of my life type stuff. And he's just been awful. So yeah, the offensive line is just, it's alarming. Their top backup along the interior is not ready to play NFL level football. Yeah, what's interesting is that the tackle stuff is great. Like Riley Reif played really well. Brian O'Neill obviously has played pretty well. Oli Udoh, they're obviously very excited about. Rashad Hill is a top-level backup tackle. Their tackle situation is pretty good, but their guard situation is abysmal. Both their starting guards are bad, and therefore their backups are bad. I'm very curious as to how much is Ezra Cleveland struggling that he's not even active on game day. Like, that's a big question for me. Like, they activated Brett Jones because he needed a backup at center. But like, and Ezra Cleveland was active actually week 2, but he wasn't active week 1. It's just like, see, he's not your go-to, right? And you invested the second round pick. We've already seen a huge difference between him and Brian O'Neill. When Rashad Hill went down, they put Brian O'Neill instantly. They were comfortable doing it. They moved this guy to guard, and then a guard goes down, and they're like, we'll put the other guard in, the one we think sucks. Like, oh. Okay, well, he's not taking anybody's job then because he's not even going to be on the field. Okay. Strangely, if Elflein comes back sooner rather than later, the offensive line situation might be slightly fine relative to last year just because it looks like we're seeing an improvement in Bradbury's play. And it looks like we've actually seen a small improvement in Riley Reif's play, which is probably just noise, but it's good to see.
It's just proof of the Bomani Jones principle of if you think you're upset at the play of your number one guy, wait until
Right.
you have to see number two, and that will be
Wait till your number two guy becomes your number one guy.
yeah. Then you'll be seeing things from a whole nother light. Let's talk about the tight end play for just a moment because there hasn't been a lot of. There hasn't been a lot of tight end play to really talk about. Is this a result of not getting open or them spending more time, blocking, or is this something from Kirk Cousins? What's going on? Because the tight end should be able to help a bad quarterback, be bailed out of a situation. Hell, how many times did the tight end tonight bail out Derek Carr?
In fairness, he is a former wide receiver. But yeah, like 13 targets. No one else got more than 3. Good Lord, Darren Waller. Part of that, so sometimes the tight ends are pass protecting, and before you panic, they've not been bad at it. Like both Rudolph and Irv Smith have been kind of all right at pass protection. So there's been a little bit of that. I think both of them had like 3 pass protection snaps against Green Bay each, and I think I saw at least one each in Indianapolis. And they did fine there, so that was kind of interesting. Beyond that, we've seen some run blocking, and Irv Smith I don't think looks as good a run blocker as he did last year. It's not like alarmingly different, but that's kind of notable. Kyle Rudolph seems to be doing all right, and how often I criticize his run blocking, it actually looks fine. In the passing game, I think Irv Smith is actually getting trouble getting open. Kyle Rudolph consistently has trouble getting open, but like that's not his thing. And so as open as he was on that Cousins throw on second down that Kenny Moore knocked out, that's about as open as you'll get. And if he's not winning those, then he's not getting the ball. So we want to see more of it. At the goal line, on that first drive, when they got to the goal line, that they ended up having to settle for 3. I was a little bit confused because they had both tight ends break into the post. And so when Cousins overthrew them, he was essentially throwing to both of them. And I don't think that was necessarily in the play design. That was kind of annoying to see. So maybe Irv Smith is still kind of learning some elements of the offense, and maybe that's one reason we're not seeing a ton of him out there. But yeah, we would have seen an Irv Smith reception, but it got called back because of like an offensive pass interference penalty that shouldn't have been called, and which like also like I don't want to knock Gladney too much for his illegal contact penalty because it looks like that wasn't a thing. And I watched it back, like, so maybe the broadcast got it wrong. So I watched it on the All 22, and it was just like, yep, nothing illegal about any of this contact. You just called it to call it, I guess. So yeah, but the tight ends are just quiet, which is a problem because so are the receivers.
Well, let's look at the other side of the ball and look at the defense, specifically the pass rush and linebacker play. What exactly is going on other than really missing some players?
Yeah, so obviously having Danielle Hunter would be nice. To me, Afadi, Adenabo, Jalen Holmes, and Eddie Yarbrough are playing, and DJ Wanham last week, are playing about as well as a good backup end plays. Like most teams would want to have these players as their number 3 edge rusher. The problem right now, of course, is that they're forced to start one of them as a starter, and they're not doing that. Their pressure rate is pretty low. I think they only got like 1 pressure each on Rivers. And the run stopping ability is actually all right, which is one of the reasons that they've been able to shut down these runs to the outside. But it hasn't been like remarkable. But yeah, the pass rush is the problem. Ngakoue was relatively silent and didn't take too many snaps against Green Bay. But I mentioned earlier, he actually had a really good game here against the Colts. And so I think going forward, that's going to be something that we're going to get used to seeing, and that's kind of nice. But, getting pressure on a quarterback 4 times in 25 snaps is good for an individual player, but it's bad for a whole defense. And so they need to find other ways to generate pass rush. They did it against Rodgers by blitzing a lot. They did not blitz Phillip Rivers too much. In fact, they actually were more likely to drop 8 than they were to send more than 5. So they're more likely to rush 3 than they were 5. And I thought that was smart given Rivers' history of being able to just absolutely demolish blitzes. So that's fine. But generally speaking, they need a better solution in terms of creating pressure and pass rush. So, yeah, I I think without Hunter, there's just not a way you're going to get it done. The interior defensive line is not great against the run, but it's worse against the pass. It's just kind of a mess. They need to find some solution there, which they don't have on the roster. And linebackers, I already talked about Kendricks a lot, and then with Barr out, you're left with Eric Wilson, who is a coverage specialist. He's still getting blown up in the run game. His coverage is normally really good, but it was not that great last week. And he gave up another play to Mo Alley Cox. And then beyond him, you got Troy Dye, who was hurt, and Ryan Connolly, who missed a couple of tackles. So the linebacker situation is just like not good.
What about safety and corners? Let's talk about some of those young corners out there that are doing that are putting all of those hours in.
Well, I would like Cameron Dancer to be healthy sooner rather than later because Gladney is just not ready. He got absolutely torched. He was just not that good. And he was not that good against the Packers in the couple of snaps that he took at the end of the game. But it's pretty clear why Dancer was starting ahead of him. And I'm glad I was a little bit steady on Holton Hill after the Packers game because it was important for me to point out that he was against Devontae Adams for 3 quarters, and so it just looks worse than he is. And so in this game, he gets a lot of T.Y. Hilton, and he gives up just 1 play to Hilton. He gets a fair amount of Michael Pittman, and he gives up 2 plays, but only 1 like kind of significant play to Michael Pittman, and then otherwise he was pretty good. And then Mike Hughes had a good game. Like he just had a good game. He gave up like 8 yards. I guess he missed a couple of tackles, so his PFF grade's low, but he had a good game. So that's nice to see. Like somebody in the cornerback room had a good game. That's worth celebrating. And I think that going forward, we're going to see average to above average play from one of those 3. We're going to see average play from one of those 3. And then the third one, you just want to hold on. Like one of these guys is just not going to work out statistically. So I don't know who it's going to be, but man, it's interesting. But I'll say this: the safeties look a lot better. Like Anthony Harris looked kind of like garbage against the Packers, but he looked pretty good in this game. And then Harrison Smith set up some pretty good plays for the defense. So the safeties are providing help. The Vikings kind of transitioned a little bit from cover 4 to cover 2 in order to protect the corners, which is maybe one reason the corners looked a little bit better than last week. So that's an important piece of context. But it did mean that the safeties had to do more, but they rose to the challenge, which was nice to see.
I know we haven't had, if we're going to do all aspects, we do have to include the kicking game. And I say that we could, but the Vikings haven't done exactly a lot of field goal kicking, really.
Yeah, they've not ended every possession in a kick, huh?
No, not as much, no. And to be fair, they also have done an obscene number of 2-point conversions. So if nothing else, the 2-point conversion thing is totally, is whatever they're doing is working. But I don't want them to have to do it.
Yeah, right. A lot of 2-point conversions. Good. And you're right. Like, yeah, they've been. And how are they this good at 2-point conversions and terrible at converting at the goal line? Like, it's the same thing, man.
Just not right. Not right at all, really. Well, let's get into the mailbag. And the first question actually covers this. From Eli, 2 weeks into the season, and the one thing has become abundantly clear: the Vikings have the greatest 2-point offense on this planet. What do you attribute their historic success? I'm going to say just the sheer amount of chances they've had to do the 2-point conversion. That they've been this down.
Playing catch up all the time and having to get like a bunch of 2-point conversions in a row. It turns out trains you to do 2-point conversions, huh?
Yeah, as it turns out. AJ asks, after another terrible showing on Sunday, this season is starting to give me 2014 vibes. Who do you blame for this start to the season on most? Zimmer, Kubiak, Kirk, or the Wilfs for not blowing this thing up and at least saving money?
Well, I don't care if the Wilfs save money, so like whatever on that front. But like they could spend all the money in the world and I'd just be like, yeah, okay, fine. But I mean, it's pretty clear that if one of the issues is a lack of preparation, then you can't do anything but blame the coach. So I think Mike Zimmer deserves a lot of blame for the beginning of the season. No question about that. I think Kirk Cousins deserves a fair amount of blame for the season. He actually, I think, played worse in the first 3 quarters against Green Bay than he did for the first 2 quarters against Indianapolis. But I think the perception is just because the Indianapolis game didn't have, those moments at the end where he ended up playing really well. The perception is that he played worse in Indianapolis than he did against Green Bay. That said, I mean, like, Cousins did not play well. Like, he's not the reason they lost against Green Bay, but it's getting difficult to find games where he's the reason they win, right? Like, kind of what we said earlier, and so with the amount of money invested in Kirk and the trade-offs you have to make, at some point you have to say, well, Kirk has to make plays in order for any of this to be worth it, and he's not doing that. So some of it is certainly his fault. And then I already talked about my issues with Kubiak, but I do think that he's doing a lot of good things that are just not getting recognized because the offense blows. And like, why would you recognize the offensive coordinator for the good things when the offense blows? So yeah, I think I would place most of it on Zimmer. I think some of it you have to talk about Spielman a little bit, just his ability to prepare for the season. They had a couple of priorities. They couldn't really find a way to address those priorities. And they created a hole where there was none in the first place by trading Stephon Diggs. And the more I think about it, the less generous I want to be about the Stephon Diggs trade. And maybe it's just this kind of primacy bias because I get to see Stephon Diggs highlights. Like, I knew they were going to happen because he's just a really great receiver. But now that I'm seeing it, maybe I'm just like more likely to believe that it was a bad trade or something like that. But now I'm like re-questioning my conclusion when it happened or during the offseason about whether or not they were actually forced to trade him. Like, because, like, does he sit out? I don't think he sits out if they don't trade him. Does it become a locker room problem? Because he was one last year and that turned out pretty well, actually, like more of that. I don't know at what point they felt forced, but the way the story is told, they see Stephon Diggs tweet the stuff, Buffalo calls, and they're like, fine. And that doesn't sound like Stephon Diggs sending an ultimatum. That sounds like Stephon Diggs tweeting. And they were just like, that's one tweet too far. See ya.
As it turns out, we have a 27 tweet limit, and you, sir, just hit 28.
Right. You're in Twitter jail, but actually we're trading you is what this means. But yeah, and it's like, okay, so that you've got problems at guard. So you cut one of them. That sounds great. That Kirk Cousins needs to have a good supporting cast, so you trade one of your top receivers. All right. That your cornerback group is just going to be difficult. And so, you let go of the guy that underperformed the most. Great. That's good, actually. You can come to an agreement with your slot corner, who's probably the best performing corner on your team, because you mistreated him probably in the Chicago game by playing him when he was injured and he was the only starter that had to play. And so he's like ticked off about that, doesn't want to come back. Fine. So that's not necessarily on Spielman, but like Trey Waynes, they couldn't afford him until, they could, right? Like they couldn't afford his, I don't know what he signed for, 13 million. They couldn't afford his salary. And I agreed with that at the time. And then they made a bunch of moves to clear up cap space. And then you're just like, well, if they had just done that, then yeah, they could have afforded Trey Waynes and signed Michael Pierce. And so instead they just signed the nose tackle. So yeah, you got a hole at 3 corner spots. You have to invest in it. And you just don't have a way to resolve that. You don't sign a corner free agency. And the thing is, it's not as if there was this like Terrence Newman like corner out there. It's not as if there was a good corner that was familiar with the Vikings system, but there were corners that would have provided a floor that were familiar with what the Vikings do. Like it would have not been bad to go after Darqueze Dennard, right? Like you just don't know who you have in these corners. And so that uncertainty level means that you want to have kind of a bottom level of performance that you can fall back on. Like if they're not performing in practice or in camp, that you don't have to worry about it because you've got this backup that's going to give you, quality level play. And they didn't sign, Darqueze Dennard or Drake Kirkpatrick or anybody who's familiar with the defense. They could have done that. Those guys didn't cost that much. I guess you would have ended up having to trade for one of them, but for a while it seemed like the Bengals wasn't gonna keep whoever it was, and the trade value was not going to be that high. And so they don't go out and try to solve the cornerback problem by getting a known quantity of any sort. Um, you say, hey, Everson Griffin fell off. Hey, Linval Joseph doesn't look like he did. So you got to let them go. And you can't really blame them for what happened with Michael Pierce. That was a good move. It just doesn't work out because of COVID. Fine. But then you don't. Then you don't really have a solution at edge rusher, and you wait until training camp where I guess you're unimpressed with a Fadi before you move a second round pick. And it's like there were edge rushers on the market. I don't know why you wouldn't spend up on Everson Griffin if you knew that he was somebody you wanted. Like the Vikings indicated they wanted him back, and they just like didn't offer him enough. It was so weird. They just like believed he was going to come back, and then he didn't. And then all the edge rushers left the market before they could do anything about it. And so now they're in a spot where they're paying a franchise tag. Well, some of it for Yannick Ngakoue. And I think Yannick's great, but like you're spending a bunch of resources when if you had planned this offseason better, you wouldn't have had to. You could have organized an extension for Griffin that would have given him better money than he would have gotten in Dallas. Then you would have been able to keep him. You wouldn't have to worry this offseason, right? You could have, and I think they were going to trade Anthony Harris away too. Just wild to me. You could have done more about this cornerback thing. Like that was predictable. You did not attempt to find a guard in the open market. And you can't do all of these things because of the cap space limitations. But the Vikings found ways to create cap space for some of these moves, and they didn't use it. It just evaporated until they traded for Yannick. If you're going to do that, like be more proactive about solving some of the problems that you have. If you're not going to do that, then it's your fault. So, like, yeah, some of the Viking struggles are Spielman's fault. And, I've been on the record. I think Spielman's a really good GM. But when a bad season happens because of predictable problems that could have been resolved by personnel moves, that puts it on the person in charge of personnel. So, yeah, there's some blame to put on Cousins. But you do know what you're getting out of him. And so if you're not putting stuff around him or you're not creating a good offense for him as a coordinator, a little bit of that's just on you. Some of it's on Zimmer. The team looks unprepared. Other teams have dealt with a lack of offseason training programs and I guess a lack of preseason better than the Vikings have. So that's on Zimmer. And some of it's just they don't have the horses, and that's on Spielman. So a lot of blame to go around. That doesn't necessarily mean any of these guys have to be fired, and you can't really fire Cousins because of all the guaranteed money. But it does mean, like, if we're trying to figure out, like, where to point the finger, like, I guess we need three fingers. But yeah, it goes in all directions.
Ian Pauly asks a question that we got like 6 or 8 different versions of. Assuming the status quo holds and the team flounders, do you think Fields or somehow Lawrence would truly be in play? Or is this team glued to Kirk? Side note, I personally think they will be mediocre enough that Lance will be the only quarterback in play when Minnesota's on the clock, making for the longest 10 minutes of Arif's life.
Think of the number one pick and they spend all 10 minutes on the clock. That's like, you should get like your next 6 picks taken away. That's just abuse.
Well, no, I think what he's saying is that by the time the Vikings have, what would be like somewhere between a 5 and an 8 for their pick, the only quarterback that's going to be left is that lovely, lovely Trey Lance. And then the Vikings will take that whole time and you'll be sitting there going, are they really going to do this? Are they really going to grab an NDSU quarterback?
I'm having heart palpitations right now thinking it might be the 6th Red Bull, but
But Alex also says something similar. Is tanking for Trevor something we should actually consider? It would make Mike Zimmer's day because he would get to spend all the entire offseason saying Hunter is about to come off of IR just to leave him there all season to help us lose.
No, I don't think so. Here's the thing. The Vikings have 0-2 teams would have qualified for the 14-team playoff 11% of the time. Using the historical records that 0-2 teams have finished, 11% of them qualify for a 14-team playoff since the 32-team league. So that's something to consider. 538, which uses ELO, which is usually used to rank chess players, and uses the historical performance of the team. So it includes data from last year to determine the quality of the team this year. So, some things have changed about the Vikings, so it's not quite 1-to-1. But they estimate that the Vikings have about a 17% chance to make the playoffs. I think that that's a little high, but I don't think the Vikings are lower than 11% to make the playoffs at the moment. And I think if you got a 1-6 or a 1-9 chance to make the playoffs, I think you should try. Like, I don't think the sport is very fun if you don't attempt these long shot type odds, right? And I'm not saying the Vikings have to like envision that they're like the 2007 Giants or whatever, and like they make the wild card and they go to the Super Bowl. And I mean, that'd be dope as hell. I would love it. But like covering a team like that. But I think you shouldn't tank until that's your last opportunity. And I think that that's like an anti-analytics tank. I'm okay with that. But like, yeah, I don't know. You play to win, and I think it kind of like sours things for other teams because everybody on your schedule gets to benefit from the fact that you're tanking, where another equally qualified team to jostle for playoff position doesn't have the free win on their schedule, and so it's just kind of unfair. So no, you got a 1-9 or a 1-6 chance or somewhere in between there to make the playoffs. No, I don't give up. Like, yeah, the Vikings look like garbage, but like that's happened before. It'll happen again. Sometimes they end up looking fine after they look like garbage for a while. I mean, look, after the Vikings got eviscerated by the Steelers when Case Keenum started, yeah, I was pretty confident, like, this is who Case Keenum is, because that's kind of the evidence that we had at that point, given his career, his draft capital, which was none, and what we saw in that Steelers game. I don't even think even then I thought that the Vikings should tank. I just thought that they were screwed. Then they went against Tampa Bay, and I didn't believe in it because Tampa Bay at the time was giving up like points to everybody. I think at the time they were like 32nd in points allowed, and through like some heroic effort in the final 6 games, they ended up like 26th in points allowed. But Tampa Bay was just giving up points. Case, for some reason, always turns it on against Tampa Bay. And then, he screwed it up the very next game. So they start 2-2, but only 1-2 under the current quarterback. And even then, I was just like, try to win. And it worked out. Worked out. But they went on this insane improbable run after looking like garbage for 3 of the first 4 games. Yeah. So, like, I think 2017 was more improbable than, this year's Vikings making the playoffs. And it, if that's the case, just try to win. Like, yeah, it sucks and it's disappointing. And you watch this Colts game and you're like, I can't see how this iteration of it, a team that does that, I can't see how a team that does that can like meaningfully compete in a fun way. The 2001 Patriots, like they blitzed 35 times in their opening game. I think it was after Drew Bledsoe goes down and Tom Brady is the quarterback. They blitzed 35 times in the opening game, and they got absolutely shellacked. They were just a terrible team. And like halfway through, they turn it around and they go on this run. Like, try to make the playoffs. I think you owe like the sport that, and I don't usually make statements like that because it's mostly grounded in analytics. But like the whole point of me getting into this profession is because I love football and I love it when people try to win. So I don't think they should tank. But if you're in a situation where we're 9 games into the season, you haven't won a game, don't put out your stars. Like, just be comfortable, like keeping Danielle Hunter on IR and stuff. Like, at that point, okay, yeah, Danielle Hunter probably rest up for the rest of the year. Ready for a run next year, and so like try to win on the field, but like don't put anyone at injury risk for no reason. So use what you have to evaluate the roster, and if you end up with the first pick, the second pick, the third pick, get a quarterback. And we get that question a lot too. Like, should the Vikings pick a quarterback if they've got, one of these top picks? And yeah, I think so. I thought they should have picked a quarterback last year, or this year in the draft, right? Like, they had 3 holes, and I was like, I'm willing to like take a hit on the offensive line or in the cornerback room for a quarterback, just because they're so important that if you can prepare for the future and get a guy that's going to have a higher ceiling than Cousins, you should do that when you've got an opportunity, because what you have in Cousins, and you're not really in a bad spot. I think that analytically you could do a lot worse than taking a quarterback. And now that you're in this position where, in a theoretical world where the Vikings go, 2-14 or 3-13 or 4-12 or whatever, in that theoretical world, Cousins did not do enough, right? So yeah, get a quarterback.
So John Belk asks kind of a similar question, but with a different twist on it. Says, my best case scenario for the team is that we run the ball 39 times every game, which contributes heavily to finishing at 3-13, securing a top pick, even convincing Zimmer that an offensive game plan from 1982 might not be the best way to win. However, I recognize this is probably both unrealistic and an overreaction. As someone whose job it is to remain more level-headed, what's your current best-case scenario for the team? Should we still be hoping for a playoff spot? If not, how do you balance wanting a high draft pick with wanting to see developments from all the rookies?
This is kind of already just answered because, yeah, they definitely have an opportunity to make the wild card round. And everybody but the number one seed has a tough path now because of the 14-team playoff. Nobody gets only two teams get a free win. So yeah, I think if you got like more than a 2% shot or whatever, yeah, play like you've got an opportunity. Play like you can win, because sometimes you can. So yeah, I think that they should attempt to win, and then after a point where you get to you don't have any shot, that's when I transition to kind of protecting the players you want to keep going forward. I don't really I know that tanking is like the right move. I don't really have an argument against it, honestly, but like the arguments for it are just like incredibly strong because like it's the difference between getting a franchise quarterback and getting a quarterback that sets you back for 5 years, right? Like just one win can do that. But like the magnitude is enormous. But like during the season, I want to see good football, or I want to see stuff I can get excited about. And then by the time the draft rolls around, then I'm comfortable saying, I wish they had lost 2 more games. But I'd rather say that in hindsight than watch them lose 2 more games in real time. So I'm always going to root for teams to try, and I'm always going to root for young players to show development. So yeah, like tanking is smart. I don't have an argument against it. I just don't like seeing it. And so if a team I'm covering is tanking, it's going to be kind of annoying.
Kyle Slaby asks, would Tom Compton be starting on this O-line?
Oh, I mean, he certainly would be starting above Drew Samia in a world where Pat Elflein is hurt. But if it's Pat Elflein, Dakota Dozier, or Tom Compton, yeah, I think it's Compton. So the thing is, the Vikings like Elflein a lot more than everybody else. I actually don't know anybody who really likes Elflein aside from the Vikings. So I don't know that he would start above he would start above Pat Elflein in the Vikings locker room, like the way it's situated, to the degree that they happen to value Pat Elflein as much as they do. But I think he's better than Pat Elflein. So in that world, he would. And I think he also would start over Dozier. Now, remember, for the first 6 games, Tom Compton, when he was with the Vikings, the first 6 games were fine. It was after he got hurt and he came back that he was just abysmal. And while that matches the rest of his career, that's closer to kind of who he is, and that's kind of what you can expect, that is still better than what we saw from Dakota Dozier yesterday. So
Bear Near Beers asks, without knowing precisely what the danger is, would you say it's time for fans to crack open each other's heads and feast on the goo inside?
That sounds like a question that you've got the expertise for.
No comment. Mark asks, do you see the current trend of injuries continuing? This weekend felt like one of the worst in a long time.
I'm like crazy unqualified to answer this, but a little bit, yeah. If I'm just going to speculate wildly. I don't think it's the preseason. I think it's just the limited off-season workout program. And the thing is, like, some years you're just going to have more injuries early on than others. And if a year is weird in any way, you'll attribute that weirdness to like just random variance. So sometimes there isn't a reason. Sometimes it's just variance. But I think it's probably the lack of a spring program just to get people conditioned. I don't think it's preseason because I don't think like 8 snaps was going to be the difference between like Joey Bosa being healthy and not. But, getting your ligaments acclimated to the movements that you're making and so on, like that all probably matters. But I'm pretty unqualified for this kind of question, honestly.
Also, what's your favorite type of barbecue sauce and hot sauce?
So barbecue sauce, I don't have a brand in mind. I mean, like I've had some in restaurants that have just like been out of the park, and I don't remember. But you know, the barbecue sauces they have at Oklahoma Joe's in Kansas City are all really good. I tend to like spicy, smoky barbecue sauces more than I like sweet ones. I don't like vinegar-based barbecue sauces all that much. I'm not against them, but it's just not my thing. So sometimes tomato-based ones are really good. But yeah, I like your smoky, spicy ones that I found. I can probably just Google the Oklahoma Joe's barbecue sauces because those were really fantastic. Like they do everything well there at Oklahoma Joe's. Um, let's see, barbecue sauce.
I was going to say, while you're looking that up, I usually go more into the vinegar sauces personally, but it doesn't mean that there's not room to have a little bit of fun. Even something as but there are ways to kind of spruce up a barbecue sauce too. If you find yourself looking for something kind of a little sweet and a little tangy, even if you went the route of say something like a what's the word I'm looking for, like a Famous Dave's style barbecue sauce that in and of itself is a little thick, what you can do is if you take say a sweet and sassy or something like that, if you add just a little bit of apple cider vinegar in it to thin it out just a little bit, and then add in some of like some apple jelly, maybe quarter of a cup's worth of apple jelly, maybe a little bit more depending. If you end up microwaving that, but if you end up heating that up a little bit and mixing it into the sauce itself, that will take it from just regular like store-bought kind of iffy to wow, there's something happening here. Like for whatever reason, the addition of the apple jelly really does help with the with the tang and flavor.
I can believe that. So it looks like Oklahoma Joe's serves a spicy version that's Night of the Living barbecue sauce. That must have been what I had. It's smoky, it's spicy, it's really good. So that's probably my favorite barbecue sauce.
Yeah. So I tend to go with kind of random ones and just kind of mess with it because that's just who I am as far as a barbecue person. But I really enjoyed, if I'm going to continue to shill their products, the Killer Hogs vinegar. But what you can do is you can do the Killer Hogs regular, have like half a cup of that and a half a cup of the Killer Hogs barbecue that's the vinegar sauce. If you mix the two of them with a little bit of apple jelly, you're touching the face of God. It's uncomfortably good. Like you're gonna sit there afterwards and just like weep openly, like I'm never gonna have barbecue this good ever again. This is almost sad. Oh. As far as hot sauce, I am a big proponent of a Minneapolis brand hot sauce who I wish would sponsor us, who I've definitely turned on to enough people that I think sponsoring us would be a decent idea. And that is Crybaby Craig's. I really enjoy Crybaby Craig's.
All right. Yeah, that's cool. I would love a hot sauce based sponsorship. I've also tried the official Hot Ones hot sauce. That's actually really good. Are you
talking The Last Dab, or are you talking one of the others? Like the classic is the classic is good. It's surprisingly sweet, and I tried the I say it's the taco flavored one, but it does taste a bit like taco seasoning because it has a fair amount of cumin in it and everything. Its name escapes me for whatever reason. And then of course there's The Last Dab. And I have had The Last Dab, and I didn't die or anything, but it definitely had some heat on it.
Yeah, it's a lot. The difference between that and like your normal like atomic bomb crazy hot sauce is that it does attempt to have flavor, and it does not attempt to destroy that flavor with just the spice. So I've had that. That's pretty good.
A lot of mustard on that, though. I can't imagine that being one of those like, this is just what I put on my food every once in a while. Like when you break out The Last Dab, it's more of an event.
Yeah, it is. It is. But otherwise, I'm pretty situational with hot sauces. Like sometimes I like sriracha. Obviously everyone got kind of overexposed to that a couple of years ago, but it is just fundamentally a good sauce. Same company also does just a chili garlic sauce that's also fermented. That's really good. I really love habanero based hot sauces. And man, when I first had habanero, I was like, man, this is one of the spiciest peppers you can ever get. And now I'm just like so used to it. It's so delicious. It's so much better than like jalapenos or Thai chilies or stuff like that. So fermented habanero sauces I think are really good. Sometimes I'll make my own chili oil, which I learned from Chinese Cooking Demystified, which is a really great Chinese cooking channel on how to make chili oil. And sometimes that's really good to have. So it kind of just depends on the context. I think the Popeyes hot sauce just the generic hot sauce that Popeyes has is just really good on fried chicken, and that's obviously what it's for. So it's basically like a Louisiana Red, right? It's like a vinegar based whatever hot sauce, but yeah, it really depends on the context, right? Like if I've got a lot of rice, I'm probably using chili oil. If I've got chicken, I'm probably using a vinegar based sauce. In a lot of other circumstances, I'd like one of these creamier sauces, like either the hot ones or obviously the dab, the last dab. But yeah, sometimes sriracha just kind of fits. So yeah, it's situational.
I do admittedly have a bottle of sriracha just for work, which makes me feel a bit funny when I'm eating at work, because I'm not with all the COVID stuff. There's the quote unquote lunchroom where people would go in for like all the students and everything. I'm not dealing with that. I'm not eating.
Right, that's fair.
Yeah, I'm not eating in a public area at work. I'm basically just eating at my car at this point in time. So I do have a sriracha bottle at work, and oddly enough, I have a Crybaby Craig's one as well, which is very garlicky and habanero-y. It's quite good. I enjoy that one. Tampa Bay Vipers for Life, Arif's favorite Twitter account name, asks, how many games do they have to lose before ownership decides to start from scratch, i.e. firing Zimmer and Spielman? I see their next winnable game as being Houston or Atlanta, and even both of those teams have looked better than the Vikings. And does that include when Atlanta forgot the rules of onside kicks, that they can just grab the damn thing?
Well, that's the thing, though. Atlanta was good enough to get to that point, right? Like, the Vikings, you can't imagine this iteration of the Vikings forcing an onside kick. Like, at least they got to the point where a screw-up was high profile. Like, the Vikings were just like, yeah, we're so bad that it kind of doesn't matter what happens for most of this game. So,
if we go 0-6 at the bye, you and I might need to do a bit of looking at the undefeated season, the 0-win season for the Lions, and start to compare and contrast. Like that would be interesting. Yeah. Something for after the bye if things truly hit the fan.
Yeah, if we get there. But like, yeah, taking a look at some of these winless teams, or just some of the historically. So obviously the Browns. And take a look at that awful Jaguars team from a while back. That was just terrible. That awful Bills team from a while back. Those teams that were threatening to go winless.
But the question is, how long would it be for the team to decide that to move on from Zimmer and Spielman this year?
If it's 6 in a row, then that might be it. Just because they got close to firing him anyway. Like obviously with a new coach, you're just like, yeah, we'll take the lumps. But final record, if they go 7-9 or worse, I think it's on the table. I think if they go 5 and whatever the other one is, 11, 5-11, that's when it's a real concern. And then I think if they go like 4-3. Then they're probably fired. So, yeah, there's a range of possibilities, but I think you're starting to talk about it. That if they go 8-8, I could totally just be like, yeah, every other year, Curse, this happens.
Yeah. Don from Ohio tweeted this immediately before the news about Anthony Barr came out. He said, at least the team is relatively healthy, right? So I'm going to blame him. Joe Justice asks, where is the entrance to the level 7 temple in The Legend of Zelda? Obviously, it's beneath a fountain in the west section of the map, and you cannot access the dungeon unless you have acquired the recorder. Everyone knows this, Joe. Everyone.
Just be sure to take your medallion with you in case you get caught by one of the temple guards.
Exactly. The dog Eddie Crane asks, when does the fire sale begin? And it's the 2021 draft. The Vikings are picking with Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and Trey Lance all on the board. Well, so which cornerback are they taking?
That'd be the most Vikings thing ever, man.
It would be up there.
Yeah. When does the fire sale begin? Probably week 6 because the trade deadline's week 8, I think, right? So that's when you start auctioning off your veterans. Although, man, the Vikings really love having veterans around to teach youngsters, right? So we'll see. Like, the real test is if they put Harrison Smith on the trading block, team captain. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, they're probably just taking the corner that's like 6'2" and can run a 4.2 40 or something like that. And then Trevor Lawrence goes the next pick, and then the first game they play Trevor Lawrence, and he just toasts that corner.
The idea of trading Harrison Smith just chill in my bones there for a moment. That doesn't sound fun at all. Nolan asks, question for Arif's dating corner. I swiped left on the Viking-centric profile. I haven't gotten any matches in 3 weeks on this stupid thing, and my team is losing games. Is this my fault, and what sort of ritual sacrifice must I do now before Sunday's game against the Titans? Obviously, you delete the app.
Yeah, it's clearly the answer. Man, like, you don't gotta swipe right because somebody has Vikings gear, man. Like, most people suck, and that includes most people that are fans of the team you're a fan of. Don't get tricked by that. Like, if it's important to you, yeah, that's clearly going to be one of the things you're looking for, but that doesn't make it an auto swipe right. That said, get a different app. This app is not working.
Yeah, clearly this is becoming a problem. Surly Cooper asks, what fun fall and winter hobbies would you suggest taking up? Seems like I may have Sundays free this year.
Well, a lot of people got into baking bread over the summer because they unexpectedly had a bunch of time indoors. So that's something. I would get into slow cooking because it's the fall and you can warm yourself up with slow cooking stuff. This show has long been an advocate of slow cooking ever since I brought a slow cooker to training camp.
Yes. Opened the door, really. We hope it encouraged others to begin their descent into crock pottery and bringing your own crock pot into a hotel room. And confusing.
Man, they did not complain at all. Like, it started smelling. I mean, obviously it started smelling like really good. But it started smelling, and you could smell it outside of the room, and I was like, "Oh no, this is not gonna end well." And like, not a single complaint, not a single the hotel never contacted me. Everyone must have just really liked the wafting roast beef smell for like a full day and a half. So keep that in mind, I guess.
It's much better than the smell of. I'm not sure where I'm going with that. Yeah, let's not.
Other than that, try writing a novel. I don't know, man.
Not enough people curl in this world, and I've long been a believer that more people should be curling. So I think that you should
join Vernon Davis and Jared Allen.
Yeah, exactly. Work on your curling. Maybe get a couple people together, wear your masks, and start curling. That seems like a reasonable idea. Final question this week is from Jay, and I'm choosing this because, well, he's talking to me on this for most of it. He says, Dear James, no, sir, you are not insane. I've been peeling oranges with my man hands since they were boy hands. My wife, so this is in reference to last week when I had revealed the argument that my wife and I have had over how to peel an orange. And then I went to Dusty to get backup, and it's turned out that he was peeling oranges with a spoon, and now he's dead to me. It says, no, sir, you are not insane. I have been opening oranges with my man hands since they were boy hands. My wife owns a, quote, citrus peeler. It is an unnecessary tool designed for removing the skin on citrus items. Whenever I open my drawer and I see this tool, I scoff at it. My wife swears by it, but has never used it in our 5 years of home ownership. The world is full of unnecessary tools. Besides Dan Chisna, what do you and Arif see as an unnecessary tool?
Oh my God.
Also, you're not insane. Dusty is. I want video evidence of how a spoon can be more efficient than hands or said tool/knife.
I love the idea. Every time you open the drawer, you scoff. Like every single time. Like, I just love that. Like, how often are you opening this drawer? Probably like once a day or every other day. And just every time you just can't. You just can't with the citrus peeler.
I know better than to than to say the thing going on in my head. So besides Dan Chisna, what is an unnecessary tool for you, Arif?
Besides Dan Chisna. Alton Brown has like a whole thing about this. He calls them unitaskers in the kitchen, right? Things that can only do one thing. I think egg slicers are one of those things, although people will use them with avocados. They typically are just not that good. And obviously, they only work on hard-boiled eggs, right? It's like an iteration of an iteration. That said, all of these unitaskers, depending on how much you cook the thing they're designed for, can be useful, right? Like I think having a garlic crusher is probably useless if you cook as much garlic as like a normal person uses, right? But for me and for a lot of people who just like love garlic, yeah, it actually does save like a reasonable amount of time to have a garlic crusher. So not useless to have in the kitchen. What are other things like things that are less efficient than the thing that they're designed to do?
It's like the slap chop idea, where if you just spend a little bit of time practicing with a knife and just got like six or eight onions and just sat there and with a sharp knife and really worked at it, you'd be so much better and so much more efficient at said, working with a knife than any sort of time that you would save with a slap chop or something like that.
Yeah. Also, like, this stuff gets like dull pretty fast, so you have to keep going through it.
Yeah.
So
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
All right, so that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you enjoyed it. We will be back later this week to preview the Titans game. That swallow was just because there's another football game, and we're going to see what happens with the Minnesota Vikings as they strive toward their first win of the year. I'm trying to be optimistic. Is this what it sounds like when you're optimistic?
Yeah, we're going to have to listen to... What was it, 2 years ago? Cautiously Optimistic Arif?
Yep, the season of Cautiously Optimistic Arif. I think it was 2 years ago, yeah. So we'll see what happens here.
Review the tape.
Yeah, we're going to have to review the tape on this one. But that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Arif, where can they find your work?
You can find it at theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan or on Twitter, where my posting has gone out of control.
Gone out of control. Well, that's gonna be it for this episode. We will see you back later this week. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember to always bring your wine towel. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.